Hey guys, Nintendrew here, and man, I am really not feeling it today. Hey Sean, do you have any ideas for videos that you've been wanting to try out? Are you serious? Dude, yeah, I've been doing nothing but playing on my PS5 for a year, and you've kept me locked up in that basement. What do you mean, you wanted the basement? That's not the point. Listen, just step aside, nerd. My time to shine. You know what? Have at it, buddy. Knock yourself out. I will. Oh. Hey guys, Playstasean here. Today we're going to take a look at two particularly interesting PS5 titles that have a bit of a common thread. Deathloop and Returnal. Both games make use of a similar death loop mechanic, but which if either of these titles is worth your time? In this video, we'll pit them head to head against each other to see which looper comes out on top. Let's get to it. Alright, let's get started. So, Deathloop and Returnal. On paper, these games have a lot of similarities. Both titles were released as PS5 exclusives, and both deal with the idea of a death loop. That is, you keep playing until you die, and then the game resets. If you're a big-time epic gamer like myself, you probably know of this concept as a roguelike. But I do feel the need to state here, these games are absolutely not roguelikes. A true roguelike resets everything you've been working toward upon death, outside of maybe unlocking new items or paths for future runs. But these games have an extra layer that helps them lend themselves better to a beginning-to-end single-player experience. You don't truly reset on a death in either of these titles, at least not in the way that you're probably thinking. So if you don't like roguelikes, you may still really enjoy one or both of these games. If that is your concern, perish the thought. Now you may have also heard of the term roguelite, which is a similar but slightly looser term that applies to a wider range of games. But I don't really think that subgenre fits here as a descriptor either. Instead, I'm gonna muddy the waters even more and add on to this naming scheme by coining the phrase Roguelife, which I'm defining as a game that resets most or all player stats and items with each death, and in which the looping mechanic is a core facet of the overall narrative. For example, in-game characters are aware of the looping phenomenon, and or the game's mechanics or environments change significantly as a result of previous runs. Now, if you've made it this far, I'm guessing you want to know, which game is better? In this video, I'll be comparing and contrasting the two so you can get a feel for which, if either, is right for you. But the short version is, both games are worth playing. Both delve into this newer subgenre and really set the bar for similar games to come. But that doesn't mean there won't be a winner here. After all, this is an opinion piece, and I'm a very opinionated guy. So stay tuned for my final verdict. Let's start our cross-analysis by first taking a look at Returnal. In Returnal, you play as an astronaut named Celine who has crash-landed on an unfamiliar world and soon discovers that every time she falls to the hostile entities native to this strange planet, she's sent back to the exact place and time that she first arrived. On top of being a foreign and unwelcoming setting, the world of Atropos is constantly shifting and changing every time she loops, making the environment feel all the more alien. Returnal's narrative makes use of a common story trope known as the unreliable narrator, meaning it's unclear if everything that the player sees is really happening, or if everything is fake and just in the main character's head. And like so many things in life, the truth likely lies somewhere in the middle. When it comes to gameplay, if you want a quick pitch, it's basically like a Metroid Prime game, but with a third-person perspective and randomly generated levels. Another way you could think of it is, it's very much like the hit indie title Risk of Rain 2, but with some fancy particle effects and a AAA budget. Speaking of which, if you haven't played Risk of Rain 2, you absolutely should. It's on PlayStation, Xbox, and even underpowered systems like the Switch. Hey, I can still hear you. Quit bad-mouthing the Switch. This is my episode. I do what I want. Don't make me pull out the sales figures. Moving along, let's take a look at Deathloop. Deathloop is kind of like a 60s retro-futurism-style Bioshock game stuck in an infinite time paradox. You play as Colt Vaughn, a military vet turned head of security for the Eon program. Eon is an experimental time loop surrounding the Isle of Blackreef, which was built in an effort to advance human potential and avoid an impending apocalyptic future. The game makes use of common FPS mechanics as well as power-ups known as slabs that expand Colt's arsenal and assist the player in hunting down his enemies. As you progress, you'll gain access to permanent weapons, abilities, and pieces of information that stick around between runs and will help you plan your final escape to ultimately break the loop. To do so, you'll need to explore each of the game's 4 neighborhoods at different times of the day and amass enough intel to take down each of the loop's 8 eccentric protectors during the course of a single in-game day. Now, one of the biggest differences here is, unlike Returnal, Deathloop is almost completely deterministic. Let me explain. In Returnal, as I mentioned, the world is constantly shifting and rearranging itself, so every new death means a new layout to explore with a practically infinite number of possible routes. But even with that degree of uncertainty, you'll pretty quickly get a feel for what kinds of rooms you can expect to find on any given run. And with some practice, you'll be able to fully clear one of the game's 6 distinct environments in about 20 minutes or so. Where Returnal is a fluid, changing world with a new environment every time, in contrast, Deathloop is more accurately characterized as being one big, consistent puzzle to be solved. In Deathloop, you can learn where specific enemies are patrolling, where particularly powerful weapons are stashed, and where your targets are going to be hiding every time. Your actions can affect the world around you and manipulate the characters into moving to different areas, but if you play 2 in-game days in basically the same way, you'll have pretty much the exact same experience. Here's another comparison that might help. Deathloop is kind of like one of my favorite classic PC games, Myst. I know this might seem like a strange connection to draw, but hear me out. In Myst, you have to solve tons of puzzles across a myriad of strange worlds, and it all ultimately leads you to look at a specific page of a book in one of the earliest areas of the game. Once you find the code hidden on this page, you're able to reach the ending. On all subsequent playthroughs, you can actually beat the game in a matter of minutes with this special knowledge. Similarly in Deathloop, once you've found all the information you need to know where to find each target, at what time, and how to kill them, you can easily plan out the one and only viable strategy to knock off all 8 targets in a single day and finish the main story. Collecting that information and building that strategy is the core mechanic and overarching goal of the game. If we keep running with the analogy to classic PC games, Returnal is maybe best compared to a game like Quake. Careful resource management and plenty of practice will be crucial for players looking to make it through the campaign. Puzzles are present, to be sure, but exploration, platforming, and combat are front and center. Again, personal preference will undoubtedly color your opinion of which of these experiences is more fun. In my opinion, both games are a blast and are worth playing. But for what it's worth, I don't find much replayability in Deathloop. Returnal's looping mechanic is closer to a traditional roguelike, similar in gameplay to games like The Binding of Isaac or A Robot Named Fight. As a result, Returnal can continue to be enjoyed long after the main story is over because it still presents new map layouts and experiences every time you play, not to mention a wealth of post-game content including an endless mode and daily challenge runs. Another major difference between these two games is found in character exposition, and in this way they really could not have been more different. Returnal presents an intimate view of some really mature themes, including mental health struggles, generational family abuse, and the process of grief. The story gives players a wealth of information, but also leaves areas for curiosity and speculation. In addition, the game presents 2 very distinct storylines that run in parallel, one about the backstory of the main character, and one surrounding the native civilization of the post-apocalyptic planet that she's crash-landed on. This story expands as a result of decoding messages, exploring first-person investigation segments, listening to scout logs, poking around your ship's computer, and discovering alien hologram museums. It unfolds at just the right pace, it blends elements of horror, fantasy, and sci-fi, and it covers some pretty intense subject matter that can evoke strong emotions. At the same time, the gameplay is never really interrupted by these details. It's all optional to explore, and if you do choose to engage with it, you can do things like listening to scout logs while continuing to fight baddies, or re-examining your collection of artifacts at any time through the pause menu. In contrast, the story of Deathloop surrounds a cast of almost completely distant and generally unlikable characters. And that's no accident, that is by design. There is some lore to be found by reading notes and by eavesdropping on private conversations, but more often than not, the info you find tends to be just some fun banter that doesn't have much to do with anything. If you do manage to find a tidbit of actually useful intel, it's usually just a hint for an upcoming puzzle rather than any meaningful narrative exposition about the 8 visionaries you've been tasked with hunting down. Unlike Returnal's beautifully rendered and acted cutscenes, Deathloop's cutscenes are limited to short in-game moments or 2D animations reminiscent of those seen in Mirror's Edge. Not to say there's anything wrong with that, Mirror's Edge is amazing, one of my favorite games of all time, but it is a difference that I thought should be highlighted. As far as writing is concerned, there are some laughs here and there, but ultimately the dialogue isn't really the focus. The gameplay is. Now that's not to say Deathloop doesn't build up some really compelling questions about its universe, it absolutely does. But in the end, a lot of those questions are never fully explored. It's kind of like Netflix making Archive 81 and then canceling it after 1 season, ending on a massive cliffhanger. Way to go, guys. To illustrate this point more clearly, I'd like to take a look at the game's ending. So fair warning, here we go. Spoilers incoming. Put on the spoiler vision. There we go. Perfect. Once you've gotten all the way through Deathloop and you're finally ready to face off against Juliana, the game has presented a lot of questions, like how does this time loop really work? Why has Colt lost all of his memories, and why is he only now starting to get them back? What's going on in the world outside of Black Reef? Who has been leaving these messages, and why is Colt the only one able to see them? Why is Juliana encouraging him to break the loop, but still clearly scared of him succeeding? What's the true risk in ending the loop? At this point, it seems like all of these questions are finally going to be answered when Juliana makes her last case for why you shouldn't kill her and escape from this never-ending nightmare. Once you finally get to her hideout to sit down and hear her out, her argument boils down to this. Hey, you know that goal you've been working toward this entire time? Please don't do it! Nothing is really explained, and it seems like Colt's dialogue is even written in such a way that he doesn't care. He's not interested in her explanations.
I want you to ask questions. About this place, about me, about the other Colts.
So I can forget the answers like everyone else.
As a player, this can be incredibly frustrating. Now at this point, dear viewers, you might be saying, Sean, you just don't like the nuance of subtlety or ambiguity, but that's not the case. Returnal also doesn't explicitly explain every facet of its narrative, but it's clear that the developers didn't just get to the end, shrug their shoulders, and say, I don't know. The attention to detail in regards to Returnal's story is genuinely incredible, while still leaving room for interpretation. There are secrets and hidden knowledge to be found around every corner throughout the game, and if you've played it before, I'm gonna try to blow your mind here with one specific example. The story of Returnal has strong parallels to ancient Greek mythology throughout, and it's clear that Celine has some conflicted feelings about the birth of her child. Now, the health resource that you've been collecting throughout the game is called Silphium, and if you haven't looked into it, you might have assumed that Silphium is just a chemical element the developers made up for the sake of the game. But in reality, Silphium is an actual plant in the real world that was used by the ancient Greeks and Romans as a form of birth control. Given the context of everything else, that's a pretty dark detail. Every corner of this game is filled with little breadcrumbs like that paint a very clear picture of a truly complex and broken human being that ultimately feels real. Okay, no more spoilers. Get that spoiler vision out of here. Now, I've been pretty hard on Deathloop so far, but one thing this game definitely has going for it is puzzles. If you're not cheating your way through with a walkthrough, you'll need to explore pretty much everything and solve a number of challenges to unlock the information needed to complete the main story. Unfortunately, more often than not, these puzzles aren't any more complicated than finding a note with a specific code in one part of the game, then heading to another part of the game and entering that code. But for the most part, they're entertaining nonetheless. On the other hand, in Returnal, the main puzzle is really just the game's ongoing cost-benefit analysis. You're constantly taking out baddies, finding chests, getting money, and buying upgrades, while learning what certain items do, making on-the-fly decisions, and trying to craft a solid build in order to survive as long as possible. However, there are also plenty of secret areas and optional challenges to add to the experience of exploration if you choose to seek them out. Like I said, your personal preferences are ultimately going to determine which, if either title, is for you. But for what it's worth, here's my verdict. Especially given the disparity of press coverage between these two games, I think a lot more people should know about and play Returnal. In my opinion, the team at Housemarque have put together a true masterpiece, and to be honest, this was my favorite game of 2021. If you've managed to snag yourself a PS5, do yourself a favor and give this title a go. You won't regret it. Man, you know, usually I think of you as a pretty blindly loyal fanboy, but you've actually got some nuanced opinions on game design. I'm proud of you, man. Thanks, Drew, that means a lot. Just because we have different interests doesn't mean we can't find common ground.
Hey guys, it sounds like you're having a lot of fun out here. Do you mind if I join in?
Shut up, X-Bob! Can't you see we're having a moment? Yeah, get out of here.
Ah, gee, sorry fellas, I didn't know. I'm sorry. I'll go back. I'm sorry.
Nerd. Hey guys, thanks again for watching and for making it all the way to the end of the video. If you like this one, here are 2 more videos you might like as well. As always, if you like what I do and would like to help out the channel, I've got a link to my Patreon on the right side of your screen. And otherwise, I hope you look forward to the next one. Take care!